Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money. I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. It is not enough to win a war, it's more important to organize the peace. And that's, I always give some nice Greek wisdom at the start of our episodes. That's from Aristotle, who was a tutor of Alexander the Great, of course. Good evening. Welcome to the Greek Civil War segment of the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I have once again Jess here with us today. How you doing, Jess?
Well, I'm okay. I've been a little sick, but I pushed through it just to be here with you because I enjoy this podcast so much.
And that's why we love you, Jess. Really appreciate it. Irene knew, for the people who know, that she was already sick. I was holding back a bit of a laugh when I asked, how you doing? Because I know you're really sick. So I really do appreciate making some time today. Today's title. Oh, go ahead. I have one announcement. It's kind of a personal thing. I didn't mention it earlier.
I was just laughing at the fact that Alexander didn't necessarily take Aristotle's advice, but
Oh yeah, right. Because after the empire immediately fractured, immediately fractured after practically. Yeah, good point. Good point on that. No, I was just gonna say I made a friend with a 60-year-old Japanese dude down the street who I drink with once every couple of weeks. He's like a salaryman, but in America, you know that Japanese salarymen, they're like the guys who are always working. They're the guys you'll find 9 a.m. in a weekday, really drunk in a suitcase, on the street.
Yeah, my favorite people in the world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really. I like these salarymen. Sound like a really good time. So anyways, he's good company and we drink once in a while. I just think that's hilarious because, who would have thought? But anyways, let's get into it. It's a lot off topic, but my first salaryman Japanese drinking buddy I've made in my life, so I'm pretty proud of it. Today's episode title is "The Masochists and the Spaghetti Eaters." Where we left off last, the Axis powers had finally completed the first task, winning the war for Greece. The Italians tried but flopped miserably, and the Bulgarians were interested but were mindful enough to know that they were not up to the task. In the end, it was the Germans, not their amateur Axis allies, who were able to break the impasse. Operation Merida and Mercury, the latter more so than the first, proved to be costly enough for the Germans, but there was no stopping the Nazis, and the conquest of Greece proceeded.
They really hitched up their jackboots and got it done, huh?
Yeah, I think the meth helped a lot.
It does. It really does. It tends to.
But also, meth tends to help with these types of things for sure. Also having something 400,000 Italian troops pressing on you also in Albania also tends to help.
I mean, if nothing else though, on the meth subject, ask the Japanese. It just tracks.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, bringing it back
around. It's got a steady
around.
track record of meth.
It does. It's a real big motivator.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. While we just witnessed the end of major-ish combat operations in Greece for the remainder of World War II, we are about to enter what will really become like just another phase of the war. So if war is the Nazis' strong suit, then organizing the peace of an occupied people's land was certainly not, at least not in Greece. But we'll let the listeners decide after they hear everything here. Because I guess, when I wrote that, I was like, not good at organizing the peace, but then I was like, if the peace was meant to be miserable and invoke mass death, then they were pretty good at it then, at that point, right? So,
I mean, I think that is Nazi peace in essence.
Good point.
Specifically
like Roman
during
peace.
wartime.
Yeah.
No, there's more to say for
peace
Roman.
Or whatever.
There's more to say for Roman peace, because there can be Roman peace. There cannot be Nazi peace.
True. Pax Romana, baby. With right? Roman peace, eh? Right? So, with that being said, what I want for us to do now is like just take a couple steps back, rewind to the start of the occupation of the mainland. At the start of May in 1941, then slowly move forward over this episode and the next, passing over the subduing of Crete chronologically, which we already had a couple episodes on that. And then keep working our way forward to autumn and end of the calendar year of 1941, and then into the winter of 1942, and really end up at the spring of 1942 is like the goal for the next two episodes, okay? And this will be the backdrop against what the next several episodes will take place in, which, as we'll see, is the absolutely brutal Nazi occupation of Greece.
God,
I know. Aren't you glad you came back for this podcast? I mean, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
And it gets a lot better, trust me. So now that the Allies had finally been expelled from all of Greece, let's finally get to meet the newly established Hellenic state. That was the name of the new collaborationist regime, which answered the question of how Greece was to be ruled, which, as we'll see, will be similar to the puppet Vichy government created in France. This was in contrast to other places in Europe like Poland that had just a simple occupational force instead of a puppet regime. In terms of who would be occupying where, well, the who was, of course, Germany, Italy, and Bulgaria. And the zones of occupation went something like this. And I know I need to post maps on the Instagram page, so please bear with me, guys. I'll get those maps up. So, Germany, obviously the real guys in charge at the end of the day and bringers of victory and all that, occupied central Macedonia, including the Athens of the north, Thessaloniki, and the surrounding other biggish cities like Florina, Kilkis, and yada yada, right? Additionally, the Germans held a couple islands as well, like Limnos, Lesvos, and Chios, just to name like the bigger ones. And lastly, the Germans held the western 3/4 of Crete, specifically the Chania, Iraklion, and the Rethymnon regions, and a strip of land that ran along the Greek border with Turkey, just in case the Turks got a change of heart. Which, spoiler alert, they don't. In fact, in mid-June of 1941, the Turks will actually sign a 10-year treaty of friendship with the Nazis, and they'll take advantage of just the chaos, Greece's weakened position, but just the global chaos in general to enact several pogroms, further cleansing the Christian minorities, like legislating an act which enlisted Jews and Christians into labor battalions that were practically like concentration camps. Yeah, it's bleak. It's so bleak.
They had just given up being the Ottoman Empire just so short time ago, and once you're a land pirate for that long, it's really hard to stop being a land pirate. I mean, yeah. It's difficult.
They just had to
it's
go
a
right
difficult
back at
tradition from the 1850s.
Yeah, it is.
Or from the 1850s, from the 1450s. Let's face it, it's a tradition in Turkey from that point on, like land piracy against Greece.
I'll post the article.
Much longer than that.
Oh yeah, I mean we're talking going back, We're talking about Harkonnens and Atreides over here,
Yeah, since the beginning of time, since the beginning of civilization in those two areas, just constant land
at least
piracy.
Yeah, at least 700 AD, right, when the Turks came over from, east, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. I'll post the article, though. It's a really interesting article. It talks about, it's by the Providence or whatever. I'll put it in the show notes and you guys can read it. So that is the Germans' occupation zone. The Italians would control the Ios Nikolaos region of Crete, which is like the eastern quarter per se, the Dodecanese Islands, which they already had control of anyways. And then the Italians and the Germans jointly occupied Athens and Piraeus together. But like truth be told, the Germans were chiefly in charge of everything. And then the last and smallest occupier, Bulgaria, would not just occupy, but actually formally annex Eastern Macedonia and Western Thrace, meaning these lands would return, in the words of King Boris III, back to the, quote, fold of the Bulgarian motherland. These areas...
Oh, nothing's ever good when you return to a fold of a motherland. Never good.
Now, that's
never
gross.
Good.
So these areas, which included cities like Alexandroupoli, Drama, Kavala, and Xanthi, along with a few islands like Samothraki and Thassos, as we talked about in previous episodes, had always been coveted by Bulgaria since even before before World War I. And most importantly, while it didn't give them the jewel of the Balkans, Thessaloniki, it did give them access to the Aegean, which was a huge win for them. Upon the Bulgarians taking control of these regions, Bulgarization commenced, which is like a fancy way of saying a lot of ethnic cleansing happened, but Bulgarian flavored, right? If violence had a flavor. So as a result
that's a special flavor.
It's a very special flavor. It's I really don't know a lot of Bulgarian cuisine, to be honest. So I was gonna say kebab flavored. I don't know. Do you know any Bulgarian food?
I assume that it's... No, I don't actually. I was gonna say just, beet flavored, but no, I don't actually.
Maybe. Perhaps. Well, whatever the flavor was, it wasn't... The Greeks weren't liking it there, the flavor of it, let's say, and over 100,000 ethnic Greek refugees and many Muslim refugees as well booked it south, west, and east out of the Bulgarian zone. Of all of the three occupation zones, the Bulgarian zone was considered the worst of the three, which, as we'll see, is an insane thing to say, considering fact that the other occupation zones were occupied by the Axis powers, right? That's how bad the Bulgarian occupation zone was. And we'll talk about it. I'll have another episode about it. There's a really great book called The Last Ottomans, and it really talks a lot about this stuff. It was bad. The Bulgarian occupation zone was really, really bad.
I mean, there ain't no cleansing like Vulcan's cleansing, because it just don't stop,
Unfortunately, yeah,
it just don't stop. Cleansing don't stop.
Yeah, it's funny. You know who said that quote originally, right? Ain't no party like a Detroit party, because a Detroit party never stopped. It was Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick.
Well, I'm just lame and was thinking of a Lemon Party, as in 30 Rock.
Oh, really? I'm not familiar.
But then again, I'm just, oh my gosh, we really got to work on your TV show quotes, man.
I mean,
and your popular band quotes. T-Rex, 30 Rock. Come on, man. We've got to get you into pop culture just a little bit. And that is coming from somebody who reads exclusively history books.
Always Sunny in Philadelphia is our mainstay here at Diogenes Lamp. So there was some chatter of the Italians following the Bulgarians and annexing a part of Greece as well, specifically the Ionian Islands, but they never materialized to anything in reality. Poor Yugoslavia was divided up even way more extensively than Greece was, with Bulgaria also annexing what is today the country of North Macedonia, Hungary taking the Bačka and Baranja regions in northeastern Yugoslavia, Italy annexing southern and eastern Slovenia, the coastline of the Adriatic Sea, including Montenegro and Kosovo, and Germany formally annexing eastern Slovenia, which is nuts. And Croatia, like we had mentioned a couple episodes back, were given their own independent state, headed by the genocidal Utaše, who were so freakishly into killing Serbs and other religious and ethnic minorities that even the Nazis were appalled. That's how bad the Utašes were. And the Utaše conducted a lot of this busy work via a concentration camp called Jasenovic, which is one of the most infamous concentration camps in World War II. Pretty terrible stuff. Anyways, we'll revisit our northern neighbors a little later when they come back into the picture more. Like I said, I'd love to cover Bulgaria. Hopefully we can have a standalone episode on Macedonia. We talk about super interesting, really controversial, a lot to get into there.
Yeah, they definitely need to be their own standalones. And also, I think the split up of Yugoslavia, when you look into it, really does make sense in terms of how Germany thought and how old school powers thought, especially when it comes to looking at how you split the Habsburg Empire, what was essentially the Habsburg Empire up. But the only thing I was going to point out that is interesting is something that Greece was bizarrely afforded, in that they were afforded something that Vichy France actually was afforded. Their
good
own
point.
puppet regime, which is not something that a lot of countries, and even though we're going to come to find out as we continue, it's not necessarily a great gift from the Nazis.
Right.
And it's certainly not intrinsically respectful, and it's not some great gift, and it doesn't really work out in your favor. But in terms of where the Nazis were and how they looked at groups ethnically, it's actually a sign of weird respect. And they actually preferred the Greeks to the Italians in some kind of weird way. And that they
and
did
the
grant
too,
them their own, and the Slavs, they granted them their own puppet regime, because in their own way, they did respect the Greeks. It's a weird sort of Nazi thing that exists, and we see it in France, we see it in Greece, and we see it in, a few other places, but they're kind of rare. I mean, usually Nazis walk in, Nazis take a stamp, Nazis take over. And especially when you consider the fact that Greece, as far as Germany is concerned, having to step in caused them a 5-week delay in their Russian campaign. So they weren't happy that they have to go clean up after Italy in the first place, to be there at all. And in a way that's going to be taken out on the Greek people, but it could have been so much worse. So it's such a weird thing about who, in an ethnic way, what they consider superior, what they don't consider superior peoples, and this weird momentary pause that they give this respect to the Greek people. It's one of those weird byblows of the Nazi regime, for a moment in time, that it's bizarre.
It's very strange, and it's so bipolar too, right? Because we respect you. Greece is the paragon of cultural civilization, and then it's we will kill all of you if we have to.
But
which
we'll
is, as
kill
we'll
all
see.
of you.
Yeah.
But we spent years between 1932 and 1938 hunting around in here for all these Madame Blavatsky treasures and whatever else,
exactly.
Playing Raiders of the Lost Ark and doing all kinds of weird shit.
What was that quote by Hitler?
Love you as a people group.
You know that quote by Hitler where Hitler's why is Himmler or Göring or whoever, I don't know, the other Nazi, why are they digging up, doing excavations in Greece to point to the fact that while they were making literature and stuff, we were living in mud huts? Why did they want to point that out even more? It's a quote by Hitler where he gets really pissed off that some people are doing
yes.
You know what I mean? Because that's how much they thought, you know what I mean? It's really funny.
But yet he wanted to establish that same national mythology and continued to
Yep.
Again, meth is a hell of a drug.
Meth is a hell of a drug, man. Should not be combined with societal. It shouldn't be combined with policies planning, is what you're saying.
Yeah. You shouldn't let
ketamine too probably shouldn't be involved.
No, ketamine,
not
and
the
then
point
just
of any current
cocaine for casual use. No, probably not that either. You shouldn't let your head of propaganda and your head of state national religion and also the SS just be like taking them in gobs and
Right.
doing whatever
Up
they
to the
want.
gills and uppers.
Up to the gills and uppers. No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. You shouldn't be letting
Bad
them
news
live that
bears.
Rick James life.
Yeah, they're not ready. Can't handle it. They cannot handle it. Oh
No.
man. So one last thing I want to clarify before we move on from who occupied where, is that, to be clear, the Italians occupied anywhere that the Bulgarians and Germans did not, which on the map looks practically like they were occupying the entirety of Greece. But population-wise, it was the Germans that ruled over like the major population cities like Athens, Piraeus, Thessaloniki, Heraklion. Like, that's the big thing to understand. At the head of this territorially kneecapped Hellenic state stood Yorgos Tsolakoglu as the prime minister. You may remember him as the general that helped capture Korçë in southern Albania, or northern Epirus, if you will. He was the guy that Papagos was like, no surrender to the Germans. And Tsolakoglu was like, I will absolutely surrender to the Germans if it means humiliating the Italians. He had zero experience in policy, and his cabinet consisted of another half dozen or so inexperienced generals, a professor of medicine who was married to the niece of German Field Marshal Liszt, and another dude who was a merchant with significant German business connections. Tsolakoglu immediately lost credibility with the formal loss of Western Thrace and Eastern Macedonia to the Bulgarians, and to compound his illegitimacy as head of state, the Archbishop of Greece, Damaskinos, refused to swear in his government, because this is Greece, right? And it's not exactly like, culturally, it's secular, but the church is still very much, even today, they're blessing F-16s and tanks before they launch them in Greece in the Greek military, So, this is not a great start for a leader of Greece.
But not that different from Russia. So, what are you going to do?
Right. Yeah. Bulgaria, a lot of countries in Eastern Europe.
The
Armenia,
Balkans as a
the
whole.
Balkans. Yeah. Rest assured, though, that the Archbishop was replaced by another guy who did the swearing in, and the government was formally created. So, he was still was able to proceed. Something else I want to mention about the occupying forces is that at the start of the occupation, the Greeks especially hated the Italians. Surprise. What they saw when they saw an Italian walking on Greek soil was a soldier that was only there due to Hitler. It was the Germans they had lost to, not the Italians. The Italians they had humiliated in Epirus and Albania. It was the Germans, after all, that with their huge admiration of Greek acts of bravery and valor in the field, had allowed them to capitulate so honorably, as we talked about in the Krauts to the Rescue episode, allowing most surrendering Greeks to go home instead of off to a concentration camp, and protecting them from some last-second Italian attempts to steal any scraps of glory. In the first week of May, immediately following the formal fall of the mainland, Hitler made a speech at the Reichstag in Berlin praising the Greeks for their bravery, stating that, and quote, towards the Greek people, we feel a sense of genuine compassion. Talk is cheap.
Tell me, did that continue to work out for them? How did that go?
It's funny to say that, Jess, because as we're about to see, any perceived feelings of Philhellenism that some may thought Germans harbored were superficial at best, and went out the window altogether when the occupiers really got down to business. Some of the first major dictates on that population were, so here's that compassion we were talking about, right? No displaying of the Greek flag, no singing of the national anthem in public, no carrying of weapons, no aid or help given to Allied prisoners or Allied troops on the run. Any violation of these orders would, and quote, be met with the utmost vigor and without compunction, and the culprits would bear full responsibility for any innocent blood shed. One of the first actions that Germans took that absolutely confirmed that the good feelings were not sincere nor long-lasting was what can only be described as like modern-day pillaging. And historian Mark Mazower gives us a fantastic look at what this plundering actually looked like, and it's terrible. So, for starters,
Nazis? You don't say?
Listen, I was told very specifically on the Joe Rogan podcast that Hitler was an okay dude, and that it wasn't. I don't know if you saw it. I don't know if you saw that earlier today, or like last week, was it?
The trains ran on time.
Darn it, the
Tucker
trains ran on
Carlson said the
time.
trains ran on time.
And the eggs were cheap. By golly.
Eggs were so cheap.
If that's not government efficiency, I don't know what is. So, for starters, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that there wasn't a single sector, industry, or aspect of society that was left untouched. And by left untouched, I mean absolutely ravaged. At the average Joe level of society, the Germans would barge into homes, stealing pillowcases, sheets, blankets, family heirlooms, oil paintings, metal doorknobs, yes, doorknobs as well, and anything else they could get their hands on. There were even reports of Greeks being robbed of their watches and jewelry in broad daylight out in the public. Nothing was sacred. The industrial and agricultural sectors were similarly looted with sadistic efficiency. German companies like Krupp's, who, pretty sure they're related to Tyson Krupp's today, who, despite their best efforts, were unable to fully penetrate and get controlling stakes on Greek mining companies before the war, were now given free rein to practically seize these same companies at extremely favorable prices, under the barrel of a gun, of course, right? A Krupp's employee was quoted as saying that, and quote, during the period of May 1st through May 10th, 1941, the entire output of Greek mines of pyrites, iron ore, chrome, nickel, magnesite, and manganese, bauxite, and gold was obtained for Germany on a long-term basis, end quote. The famous Lavrion silver mines, which were largely owned by the French, had their ownership signed over to the Germans, along with the electricity and water departments, the Vasiliadis shipbuilding works, textile plants, even the famous Bodosakis munition factories. I don't know if you guys remember the Greek powder and cartridge company that the Germans had sought after before the war. That was moved to German hands as well. They literally seized and moved physical plant equipment out of factories to relocate them to Germany and elsewhere to fund the war effort. This absolute gutting of Greece's industrial base led to raw material production being just somewhere around 10 to 15% of pre-war levels. So like an 85 to 90% drop, which is obviously, fucking bonkers to have a drop that
and
much.
What's crazy is, like, no matter what, like, the majority of those sales were going to allied countries anyway, and a lot of them were going to France. So regardless, a lot of those exports were now going to Vichy France. So the German nation already owned them regardless in their own mind, like once they take Greece as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Right. So they're not doing
that. They're not taking it away. They're just reallocating it, if anything.
They're just reallocating war resources in their mind, which is just an added level of gross for everybody listening.
So even army officers took part in this looting, and they had their subordinates seize any available stores of foods like figs, rice, and olive oil, which are all, of course, basic food staples. In northern Greece, leathers, cottons, and silk were all either bought at pre-war prices or outright confiscated. The islands were not spared either, and just as an example, on Chios alone, some 25,000 oranges, 4,500 lemons, and 100,000 cigarettes were shipped off the island in just the first few weeks of the occupation, which, if you're not familiar, Chios is known a lot for tobacco, so thus the cigarettes. The sack of Greece got so out of control that it got to the point where it began to piss off the Italians because they weren't leaving anything for them. But the Nazis realized that their militarily useless ally was still important, especially when it came time to actually occupy Greece with boots on the ground, particularly in light of Operation Barbarossa, which was going to kick off soon. So, to appease them, the Italians were given a significant shareholding in the Lokris nickel mines, and the leather, cotton, resin, and other useful war materials were shipped to Italy. No region, industry, or person escaped the marauding. Things got so bad, even Mussolini was distraught at what he was seeing, and stated, and quote, "The Germans have taken from the Greeks even their shoelaces." Which, when it's Mussolini is, commiserating with you, it's not good.
Things have gotten bad. But again,
things have gotten bad.
They're 5 weeks off of their target date in Russia. So they are stripping everything they can to take into what is now 5 weeks later into what will be a campaign going 5 weeks later into Russian winter than they would like.
Eesh.
And they're just robbing Greece blind to go into Russia.
Right.
Which is
absolutely
just nuts. While at the same time getting to use Greece as a negative zone to stop the Allies from approaching from the south.
From the southern
So
flank
poor
or whatever.
Greece.
Yeah.
Poor
Yeah.
Greece is just having a bad time of it, guys, and it's only going to get worse. So that's
a lot worse. Yeah, it's going to get a lot worse.
So much worse.
And that's really the theme of it, right? Is like that, and like the Axis powers are just getting what they wanted out of Greece, which was raw war materials and food. Well, what more could you want for that if you're ramping up for an invasion of Russia?
Exactly. But lest we ascribe any humanity to Mussolini, he's just kind of a whiny twat, and there's just not anything left that he wants to take. Let's not do any service as a human.
Exactly. Unfortunately, something the occupying forces didn't account for in their short-sighted quest for loot was like how the economics of it all would react. And again, there's some back and forth with this, whether they actually didn't account for this or whether they just didn't care. So you see, Greece had gone through a series of agricultural reforms during the Venizelos years, his last term from 28 to 32, and his first round of reforms, his first couple terms as well. One of the bigger of these reforms in the agricultural sector being the breaking up of large farms, which resulted in the creation of many small landholders. Again, we covered this back in a couple episodes ago. And this wasn't like hundreds of small farmers, it was thousands. Thousands of small farms had been created by Venizelos' reforms. The way the distribution of these goods, primarily grain, worked before the occupation is that these small landholders would voluntarily sell their crops and the state would step in to help stabilize prices and like that kind of thing or whatever. But that standard way of business was quickly going out the window for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons we already went over, looting and confiscation. But in addition to this, inflation started to ramp up dramatically because not only were goods being confiscated, but the Germans were handing out worthless occupation currency like hotcakes. Which, by the way, originally there were German occupation currency stuff, and then there's Italian occupation currencies, in addition to the drachma. So you had all those three, but by the end of August in 41, it was realized this is absolutely insane and obscenely inefficient. So they just scrapped the German and Italian currencies and decided to use drachmas instead. So this specific currency is the one that suffered from what we'll see will be hyperinflation. So you have the textbook inflation definition, right? Too many dollars chasing a quickly disappearing number of goods. But another big stress was that the German occupation forces were demanding something like 20 billion drachmas a month, which puts a lot of financial stress on the state. Numbers vary from economist to economist and historian to historian, but by all accounts, this run of hyperinflation was nuts. Like I said, the numbers vary, but by some estimates, inflation was running at 50% a month for nearly 4 years. Other accounts I've read state that this rate of inflation exceeded the Weimar Germany by a factor of 5,000. What this looked like in practice was a couple of pounds of corn costing 25 million drachmas in Karditsa, or bread costing 2 million drachmas. Like crazy stuff. So, what do you do when your currency becomes useless? You barter, of course, right? You trade things that have value, physical things, useful things, things that you can then trade for other useful things. For example, if you were a German soldier on the island of Corfu, let's say, and these are actual examples, okay? This is not hypothetical. These are actual real life examples that were recorded. 3 eggs could cost you a round of ammunition, or when the Germans wanted a sheep, they would barter with the local shepherd and give him a few or so grenades. Okay? And these are specifically on the island. This took place on the island of Corfu and other parts of Greece as well. Like, obviously, this is
How'd
super
that work out?
counterproductive. Yeah,
No,
right.
oh, you don't say.
I'm sure they just liquidated the grenades into currency. They put them in their bank account, never used them later. So yeah, like in normal circumstances, as more crops and agricultural goods were grown and ready to be sold, then this could kind of help offset this disequilibrium, meaning like supply catching up and trimming back on inflation a bit anyways. Not solving it altogether, but alleviating it a bit. But that was impossible. For starters, because the Axis powers seized any and all means of transportation, including mules, trucks, cars, or whatever, boats, whatever. So there was no way to physically transport goods from the countryside to the major population centers, aka the cities and their markets. And this breakdown in transportation took on many dimensions, right? Like not having a car because the Germans took all of them is one dimension. Then somehow having a car or a donkey and having the permits to be able to travel to and from one place is another dimension. So I think of it like having the physical means to travel and then having the bureaucratic means to travel. But even if you have all of that, just because of the entire new structure of this new state, even if you have both of those things, like a train ride from Athens to Thessaloniki now took 36 hours with the new state of things. And just to give you like a state of reference today, it takes 6.5 hours to get from Athens to Thessaloniki. World War II, okay, maybe it took like 12 or 15 hours, but it was not taking 36 hours. So that's just the way things were.
It's also important to note, like, it's not that the Germans did this necessarily on purpose. They're used to invading highly mechanized states, much like their own. And Greece was nothing like the rest of Western Europe specifically. So when they did this, they're not counting on small agrarian farms similar to what we see in, say, the beginning of the United States in sort of a Jeffersonian sense, you know?
Lack of railroads.
Lack of networks, lack of railroads. So when they're doing all of this, it's not just the Germans being obtuse. It's not just that they assume that, like everywhere else, there will be a recovery, that they can send their puppet government in, that it will be quickly recovered, and that business will be as usual, not realizing this is not the state of affairs in Greece. So even as they're looting, things are much different, but they also don't really care as they're finding this out actively. And we're going to see how much they don't really care, because it's going to take a turn, as it always does. It's, well, plan B, which is never good for anybody. But initially, it just never occurred to them that, you know, things are moving by wagon train and not by a high-speed rail network. It literally never occurred to the Germans that we're not talking about Belgium, we're not talking about France, we're not talking about the highly mechanized West. So that's an interesting disconnect that they were just not prepared for and not prepared to oversee.
Yep, short-sightedness through and through, really.
Short-sighted.
You know? Very much so. So, like, another reason why the food markets and food supply chains collapsed was because this quote-unquote Hellenic state, I mean, this is kind of my personal take anyways, I also think it just wasn't made with feeding its citizens in mind, right? It was like, part of it was a state made solely with exploitation in mind. You know, so, like, we'll go down that thought path a little bit.
It was the underlying assumption that you could exploit it and it would recover. It can't recover. It can't. So it was exploited, and they didn't give a shit if it didn't recover or not, for lack of. I'm sorry. I don't know if I can curse on this podcast. I'm so sorry.
I think we already have. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, literally, they did not care if it could recover, and once it became apparent that it couldn't, they said, you know, kind of to heck with it. We've already started. let's keep pressing for all it's worth, which is mind-boggling. But
Oh yeah,
it's
you're
the
gonna see it
Nazis,
gets.
so
It's the
it,
Nazis,
it
yeah.
gets so it gets so
You're gonna
much
see.
worse,
You're
I'm
gonna see.
sure.
Yeah.
Ooh, I
So
don't want
like,
to see
what?
though.
Oh yeah, you're gonna see. There's gonna be all types of bad stuff. What I meant by like it had exploitation was mined is that like even with you put aside the plundering and ever increasing inflation, is that all of these different occupation zones did not trade or support each other. So, for example, when Crete and Mytilene had an unexpectedly great olive oil harvest that year, none of it would make its way to Athens. Because even though Crete was under German control, as was Athens and Thessaloniki, none of those administrative regions sent their surpluses to each other. Same thing when the fertile Macedonian wheat fields had a great harvest. None of that surplus made its way to Athens. And this wasn't just applicable to different regions within the same occupying force, like between the German occupied regions. This approach also applied to, like, amongst the different Axis powers and their occupied zones. So, like, for example, what I'm trying to say is the Bulgarians didn't allow any of their surpluses to pass to the Germans and vice versa, or the Italians didn't trade with the Germans and vice versa. The Germans didn't allow any of their crop surpluses to go to the Bulgarians, yada, 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 right? Like, you get the idea. They did not exchange anything.
Mhm.
The skyrocketing inflation, lack of transportation for distribution, and confiscations all create an economic environment incentivizing the farmers to hoard their surplus harvest and to sell any surplus harvest they did have that hadn't been confiscated on the black market, where they would get a much better return for their food products. It was these black marketeers that would end up making a killing during the occupation, both figuratively in terms of raking in boatloads of money and literally by helping to contribute to food shortages.
That's not going to
Um,
create a problem, is it?
no, it's great.
No,
Jess, they're gonna
yeah.
efficiently distribute the food. This is how it works.
Oh,
This is like
absolutely. Yeah.
end stage capitalism on steroids. I feel like I don't know about steroids. End stage capitalism
Yeah,
feels pretty bad by
yeah.
itself, but you get the point.
I do. I do.
So the yeah, we do. America 2025 people, ladies and gentlemen, uh, these black markets, these black marketeers were known for, and this is very much like in a nutshell version of it, taking advantage of differences in geographic harvests and then exploiting them. Think of it like food arbitrage. Oh, and by the way, something I forgot to mention, prices of goods were differing from region to region by as much as 100 to 500%, right? So an apple could cost you $1 here and $5 over there. So think of what we talked about earlier, how the different regions couldn't trade with each other due to policies and due to restrictions in transportation, and then combine that with the divergence in prices from region to region. These black marketeers would bypass and adapt to these roadblocks in the markets and account for the differences in prices. And soon enough, the black market had taken over and filled the vacuum that the inefficient and useless state had left. Again, they were pretty much like the new food distributors in a lot of sense. So,
Oh, great. Great.
yeah, it's awesome. They're like the Amazon, but they're going to take your wedding ring for an apple.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not that different than Whole Foods, really.
Right, exactly. It's like Whole Foods. Pay homage to
Yeah,
your
that's
Lord
Whole Foods.
Bezos for this actually really tasty brown butter cookie, I will say. Tasty products,
Enjoy this
just obscenely
$16
expensive.
cracker.
I'm intrigued. So let's look at some examples. In Larissa, Greek officers who were hired by the government in order to collect the harvest or transportation to Athens colluded with the locals to manipulate the amount of shipment of grain going to Athens, or block it altogether. Then, when prices would go up due to the basically artificially made shortages, the black marketeers would sell their product, moving it across the regions at marked up prices to literally starving people, often taking in exchange not money. They would take jewelry, gold, silver, family heirlooms, and like that kind of thing, right? Like I said, these guys were making a ton of money, fabulously, fabulously rich. Sometimes the black marketeers would work with the authorities, like the example we saw above in Larissa. And other times, the black marketeers were the authorities, like, like on the tiny island of Sifnos, where this is really funny actually, where the 120 Italian garrison controlled the entire island's olive oil business. It's like mafia stuff. There was a similar situation on Chios, where the Germans and some locals of the island had taken full control of the olive oil, citrus, and mastic of the island. And if you're wondering like how it was possible to ship goods to and from a country, like within a country under Axis control, where the roads were dotted with checkpoints and an Axis soldier could ask you for your ID permit at any moment, well, I think right? The answer's like old as time. The secret ingredient was bribes. You bribe everyone at the checkpoints. You bribe the Germans. You bribe the gendarmes. Bribe the harbor masters and the Axis authorities, and you bribe the Greek translators. It's like funny. Like people think like the lowly German soldier wouldn't be above a bribe, right? Bribe.
I mean, show me a gendarme you can't bribe to this day. Just saying.
I haven't had too many gendarme experience. I've never ran into police in Greece. I keep a low profile in the U.S. No, I'm joking. We don't have gendarmes in the U.S. The equivalent of a gendarme is what? The sheriff. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Pretty much it. Okay. I always got confused by that.
They're harder to bribe in the United States.
Right. They just have asset civil forfeiture seizure or whatever, right? That's the equivalent of their bribes.
Yeah, they're all real big Punisher fans here, but not so much the gendarmes.
Right. The symptoms of these counterproductive policies, combined with impacts of the black markets, started to show pretty quickly, and by the end of May, there were already rations in place for basic staples like bread, rice, olive oil, and sugar. By the end of July, lines of over 300 people were forming outside of the few shops left that had any food products, with some cases of hungry patrons bringing chairs to sit while waiting in line. The situation was quickly getting out of hand. And we're still talking about the summer here, mind you, right? Mm-hmm. At this point,
winter is coming.
Winter is coming, exactly, yeah. At this point, the Axis plenipotentiaries, who were appointed to Greece, were starting to get worried, which, by the way, plenipotentiary, I hope I'm saying that kind of right, in a nutshell, is an ambassador, like a diplomat of sorts, who's appointed to govern over the sovereignty of another area or administration. Would you say that's kind of...
Plenipotentiary?
It's like a nutshell. Kind of like a nutshell explanation.
That's perfect.
Really fancy exactly word for that, I'd say. So in this case, the Axis plenipotentiaries, Altenburg for the Germans and Gigi for the Italians, had authority over Tolakoglu, even though Tolakoglu was the quote-unquote prime minister of the Hellenic state, which was a puppet if you haven't caught on yet to this point. The state was a complete puppet, and Tolakoglu was a complete puppet. So yeah, the plenipotentiaries started to get nervous, causing Altenburg to write to Berlin that, quote, Greece belongs today to the European space controlled by Germany and the Axis powers. It must therefore be brought into the economic planning for this area. Greece must not be allowed to fall into political and military chaos, end quote. When an American citizen in Athens at the time chatted up a German soldier about the situation, the German reportedly responded nonchalantly with, quote, you haven't seen anything yet. In Poland, 600 people die every day from starvation. That's great.
Well, la-ti-da.
La-ti-da, that's great. Look forward to this. You don't say, do you, Mr. Nazi? There was a brief moment in late July, though, where Altenburg was indeed able to catch the attention of the Fuhrer in regards to the growing crisis in Greece. But, by this point, the invasion of Russia was barely a month in, and anything and everything was going to be second priority to that. And that led the Germans to placing the blame on the Italians, saying that originally the Italians were the ones who had promised to take responsibility for the nutritional needs of the Greeks, and the Germans, really hammered on that. The Balkans, after all, were always in the Italian sphere of influence, according to Mussolini, right? This, of course, pissed off the Italians. One reason was because the Germans had seized the lion's share of the Greek assets and were primarily in charge of all the significant regions of Greece, like we talked about earlier, while Italy was left with sparsely populated regions in the mainland and mostly tiny islands. Another reason was because it put Germany in a position of having all the spoils of war, with practically none of the responsibilities. Mind you, at the time that Italy was supposed to fully take over as food provider for Greece, Italy proper was already importing food from Germany because food was so short at home. So it's not like they were in some kind of ideal position to assume this responsibility. There was a brief agreement where Germany and Italy would deliver 100,000 quintals each, which a quintal, by the way, is 100 kilograms. So it would have been a decent amount of grain if it was followed through on. This went well for a bit.
Really quickly, remember at this point, Mussolini is also having to use active soldiers to farm in the fields. So the reality is Italy's in trouble itself. Yeah. So there's that. Yeah. Italy's in trouble itself. So it can't exactly, I mean, it really was relying on Greece to supply a little bit of grain
right,
itself.
I'm sure they were counting
and
on it.
Of course, they don't have the Balkans under control. But if you're going to go around saying that, Hitler's going to call you on it.
Right. Absolutely. And that's pretty much what happened here, right? So the Italians ended up delivering some like 93,000 quintals, which is pretty close to the goal. And most of it went to their occupied regions like the Ionian and Cycladic Islands and Epirus. But the Germans ended up getting cheap on their end, surprise, and only delivered around 50,000 quintals before again citing that the issue should be primarily Italy's responsibility. So, I mean, as far as the ministry was concerned, or as far as Berlin was concerned, the Greeks could starve. And on that note, great note to end the podcast episode, please join us next time as we continue to look at death, starvation, misery, and resistance that were the hallmarks of the Axis occupation of Greece, and zoom in on the winter of 1941 and 1942. Take care. Se agapusa isuni adinamiamu